I have been called many things in my life: exacting, formidable, the coldest mind in 3 counties. I accepted each one. I had earned them, and I wore them the way a man wears a coat that fits too well until he forgets he is wearing it at all. What I was never called, in all my years, was wrong. Until her. Her name was Miss Rowena Vale, rector's daughter. No fortune, no connections, no station worth noting in the parish register of polite society. She came to Caldenmere Park in the autumn of my 39th year as a household copyist, engaged to transcribe the late Earl's correspondence, catalogue his library, and make herself, as my housekeeper Mrs. Peel put it, useful and unobtrusive. I was told she was capable. I filed the information away the way one files the weather: noted, irrelevant, forgotten by morning. I did not think about Miss Rowena Vale. What I thought about, what had occupied the better part of 2 years, was a manuscript, 43 pages, unsigned. It had appeared first in the hands of Professor Aldous Strake of the Royal Society, who passed it to Sir Clement Ford, who passed it to 3 others, each one more astonished than the last. A translation of a fragmentary Sophocles, a lost choral ode, recovered from a damaged Alexandrian copy, rendered into English with a precision that made every previous attempt look like a schoolboy's exercise. The Greek was ruthless. Whoever had done this work knew not only the language but the music underneath it, the weight each word carried in the mouth of a chorus standing at the edge of tragedy. I had called it, in a letter to Strake, the finest translation of my generation. No one knew who had written it. I did not connect these 2 facts. Why would I? Miss Rowena Vale was a copyist. She transcribed, she catalogued, she made herself useful and unobtrusive. The dinner was in November. I had 6 guests, Ford among them, and 2 younger scholars whose names I have no wish to record here, for reasons that will become plain. Miss Vale had been asked to remain after the cataloguing session to help Mrs. Peel with the seating arrangements, which meant she was still in the house when the conversation turned, as it inevitably did, to the anonymous manuscript. Ford was holding forth. He had a theory. The author was a Cambridge man, recently returned from the Levant, with access to the damaged codex. He named 2 candidates. The table agreed with the comfortable energy of men who have never been surprised by anything because they have never looked beyond the room they were already standing in. I do not know what made me say it. Habit, perhaps, the coat that fit too well. The copyist, I said, gesturing toward the door through which Miss Vale had just passed with a stack of leather folios. She has been in the library for 3 weeks. Someone ought to ensure she has not been attempting scholarship above her station. There was laughter, easy, forgettable laughter. She had stopped in the doorway. I did not see her face. I saw only the still line of her back, and then she moved on, and I returned to my wine, and I thought nothing of it. I was wrong about that too. 3 days later, I was in the library reviewing the late Earl's correspondence when I found an error in the previous day's transcription. A Latin phrase, copied from a 1742 letter sub rosa asterisk, rendered correctly, but the marginal gloss that had been added in pencil in a different hand was not Mrs. Peel's cramped annotation. It was a correction, precise, unasked for, and accurate. Someone had noted that the phrase as used in context carried a second valence from Cicero, and had cited the passage. I looked at the handwriting. I had seen it before. I stood very still for a moment. Then I went to the shelf where the cataloging was in progress, and I pulled the first folder Miss Vale had completed, then the second, then the third. Her marginal notes were everywhere. Not transcription errors, the transcription was flawless, but running alongside it in that same quiet hand was a conversation with the text, a disagreement with a date, a cross-reference to Herodotus, a single line in Greek, unprompted in response to a letter that had quoted Homer, and the Greek was not a reproduction. It was a reply. I sat down. I thought about the 43 pages. I told myself I was being foolish. A copyist with a good education. It proved nothing. The anonymous manuscript was the work of a scholar with access to a damaged codex in the Alexandrian tradition, and Miss Rowena Vale was a rector's daughter from Shropshire who transcribed correspondence for 12 shillings a week. I told myself this with some force for approximately 4 minutes. Then I went to find her. She was in the east corridor, returning the last of the folios to the shelf. She heard me coming and turned, and I saw her face properly for the first time, not the still line of a back in a doorway, but the full thing. She was not what the world would have called remarkable. Brown hair, plainly dressed, ink on the second finger of her right hand. Her eyes were the color of winter water, and they were, at that moment, entirely without fear of me. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people in my library with my expression felt some version of fear. She did not. The Sophocles fragment, I said, no preamble. The lost choral ode, the unsigned translation currently in the possession of Sir Clement Ford. She said nothing. The Greek prosody in the third strophe, I said. The choice to render asterisk daemon as the allotted thing rather than fate or spirit. That is not a Cambridge decision. That is an argument, a specific one, rooted in the Hesiotic usage, which most Cambridge men have not read carefully enough to make. Still nothing, but her chin had lifted very slightly. I have read that translation 40 times, I said. I wrote to Strake that it was the finest of its generation. I believed that. I still believe it. The Winterwater eyes did not move from my face. Was it? A long moment. The corridor was very quiet. Outside, the November wind was doing something complicated with the elms. Yes, she said. I had been prepared, in some abstract way, for denial, for deflection, for the performance of humility that women of her station were expected to give men of mine when cornered in a corridor and asked a direct question. I was not prepared for yes asterisk, delivered in that tone, not defiant, not frightened, not asking for anything. Simply accurate. How, I said, did you access the codex? My father corresponded with a Coptic scholar in Alexandria for 20 years, she said. He received a transcription of the damaged pages in the spring of 1841. He died before he could work with it. I finished what he began. I thought about the dinner, the easy laughter, the still line of her back. The coat suddenly did not fit at all. The attribution, I said. Ford believes it is a Cambridge man recently returned from the Levant. I know what Ford believes. You have not corrected him. No. Why? She looked at me for a moment with an expression I did not yet have a name for. I would learn it in the months that followed, and the name for it was patience, not the passive kind, but the kind that has been ground down to its hardest form by long practice. Because, she said, the last woman who submitted original scholarship to the society had her paper returned with a note suggesting she confine herself to watercolors. I had nothing to say to that. I, who always had something to say, stood in my own corridor with 43 pages of the finest work of my generation attributed to no one, and I had nothing to say. I see, I said finally. It was inadequate. I knew it was inadequate. Yes, she said, I imagine you do. She went back to her folios. I went back to my study. I sat at my desk for a long time without reading anything. What followed was not a swift reformation. I will not dress it up as one. I was a man who had worn a particular coat for 39 years, and the coat did not come off easily. I argued with her in the library about the Hesiotic usage, and she was right, and the argument lasted 3 days, and at the end of it I had filled 12 pages of notes I did not share with anyone. I watched her work. I stopped pretending I was not watching. I read everything she had annotated, and each annotation was a small, quiet proof of a mind that had been operating, unwitnessed, at the highest level available to it. In January, Strake wrote to ask if I had made any progress identifying the anonymous translator. The society wished to commission a second piece. Another fragment, recovered from a different source, requiring the same quality of work. I wrote back. I told him I had identified the translator. I told him her name. The reply came in 3 days. Strake was, he said, quite certain I was mistaken. A copyist, a woman of no scholarly record. Surely I understood that the society could not, that the commission required, that the attribution, if published, would call into question. I went to London. I did not write ahead. I arrived at Ford's house on a Thursday evening when the scholarly circle was assembled. 8 men, the fire going, the second translation already under discussion, the credit still floating, unanchored above the conversation. Miss Vale was not there. She did not know I had come. I stood in that room, and I said her name. I said it clearly. I said the translation was hers, and her father's correspondence with the Alexandrian scholar was the source, and the Hesiotic argument in the third strophe was an original contribution that no one in that room had made or was equipped to make, and the Society's commission should be offered to Miss Rowena Vale by name, in writing, with full attribution, or not at all. The room was very quiet. Ford said carefully that this was highly irregular. I said that the irregularity had begun 2 years earlier, when the finest translation of our generation had been allowed to circulate without a name attached to it, and that I did not intend to allow it to continue. The commission was offered, in writing by name. I rode back to Caldenmere in the dark. She was in the library when I arrived by lamplight, working on something she turned over when she heard my step. I told her what I had done. I told her plainly, without softening it, because she was not a woman who wanted things softened. She was quiet for a long time. "You had no right to do that without asking me," she said. "No," I said, "I did not. It will make things harder. There are men in that circle who will not accept it gracefully." "I know. You will lose Ford's goodwill entirely." "I know that too." She looked at me, the winter-water eyes, the patience that had been ground to its hardest form. "Why," she said. I had been preparing, somewhere in the back of my mind, a speech about scholarship and justice and the obligations of men in my position. It was a good speech. It was probably even true. I did not give it. Because I said, in a doorway in November, something I cannot take back, I said. And I have been trying to find the equivalent weight on the other side ever since. I do not know if there is one, but I intend to keep trying. She was still for a long moment. Then she turned the paper back over. It was the second fragment, already begun, already annotated in that quiet hand, already unmistakably hers. "Sit down, then," she said. "The Ionic dialect in the 4th section is giving me trouble, and you know Ionic better than you know anything else." I sat down. Outside, the January frost was settling over Caldenmere Park, and the elms were bare, and the lamplight held us both inside its warm and particular circle. We worked until midnight. We worked until the candle burned low and the fire needed banking, and the fragment was, between us, solved. She became, in the spring, the first woman to receive a full commission from the Royal Society under her own name. The scholars who had laughed in my dining room in November did not laugh at the presentation. Some of them had the decency to look ashamed. She became, the following autumn, my wife, not because I asked her in a ballroom, not because society arranged it, but because one evening in the library she looked up from Pindar and said, quietly, that she had grown accustomed to the Ionic problem being a shared one, and she thought, on reflection, she would prefer all problems to be shared if I had no objection. I had no objection. I had worn a coat for 39 years that told me I was never wrong. She took it from my shoulders so gently, I barely noticed it was gone. And I have been, every day since, astonished by what it feels like to be known, fully, precisely, without flattery, by the finest mind I have ever encountered, housed in a woman the world once told to confine herself to watercolors. They were wrong about her. I was wrong about her. The difference is that she forgave only one of us. I intend to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that.